What happens, according to the Space Wolves, when the Master of Mankind meets Leman Russ? How do they get into a drinking contest? What other challenges are they both going to take part in? Friends, let's find out. And welcome to another 40k video. We'll join on the Index Astartes featuring the Space Wolves. This is very much written from a Space Wolf saga perspective. Obviously the Vikings are a massive influence on the Space Wolves, and this falls in line with the sagas that were written about their great warriors. So take some of it with a pinch of salt. Much of what we know of Leman Russ's early years is born of hearsay and legend, as his fame quickly spread throughout the land. The legends of Fenris cite him as being able to pluck an oak from the earth and snap it in twain over his back, facing armies of the king's enemies and sending them running without sustaining a scratch, wrestling a Fenrisian mammoth to the ground and roasting it whole for the meal that evening. When Thingir died, there was no question as to the succession. King Russ took his place on the throne. Each All Winter's Eve, in the halls of the Fang, the Space Wolves' fortress monastery, the rune priests recount in great detail the saga of Leman Russ. Every one of the Space Wolves knows the tale by memory, and the legends are passed down from solemn priest to naive cub with greatest of reverence. In this way, the saga of the Leman Russ is kept alive to this day. Due to the old tradition, the following legend has been written down, never in fact, by the Space Wolves. However, the clandestine introduction of a vox corda to the Feast of the Wanderer by Inquisitor Chalfont, a guest at the table of Cormac Wolftongue, has provided imperial scholars with the following description. Thus, it came to pass that Russ was hailed as king of all Fenris, his judgment as strong as his sword arm, and his authority indisputable. No man nor beast could best the Wolf King. No tribe could stand against his armies. Within Russ's kingdom a truce existed between man and wolf. His court was attended by the fiercest of warriors and the most beautiful of maidens. Tales of his mighty conquests spread like forest fires, and it was not long before the eyes of terror turned upon his great deeds. Such was Russ's fame, and so great were his accomplishments, the holy Emperor of Terror did take it upon himself to meet with the Wolf King. He believed in the core of his soul that this mighty warrior was one of his true sons, a primarch. He knew well that Russ would not bow to his rule without being beaten in a contest. The Emperor was convinced of his own power and knew that such a challenge would be as nothing to him. Who could best a living god? Who could stand firm in the presence of humanity's king? And so it was that the great sky-spanning ships of the Emperor travelled to the centre of the Sea of Stars, settling on the hard, cold skin of Fenris, scant years after Russ's ascension to the throne. The Emperor, clad in a long, plain robe, entered King Leman Russ's court, his hall you might say, drawing on those Viking influences. Through a yawning cave mouth in the south of Fenris he came. His divine aura was hidden from the curious eyes of the king's court, and his towering physique was cloaked with runes of disguise and confusion. Half his face was within the shadow of his hood. In his hand he carried the oaken staff of the Wanderer, but to the sharp-eyed and sober his nature was clear. The great walls of Fenris slunk away at the stranger's passing, and with the cloak and staff and the talk of the disguise, I get sort of big Odin vibes here. Odin was the king or leader of the Vikings in Norse mythology. Slouched on his oaken throne sat Leman Russ, a flagon of fine mead in one hand, and the leg of a roast bear in the other. Freki and Geri, the kin wolves, lay curled about his bare feet, and a great pool of blood glittered in the torchlight around the base of his throne. The court had been hunting, and did not take kindly to the interruption of this stranger at their feast. The Wanderer approached the gnarled wood of the throne and its gargantuan occupant, and stood firm, staring hard at where Russ was presiding over the feast. The court grew silent as the Wolf King's growl reverberated around the walls. Freki stood at the sound, baring his fangs. Geri, all beyond his years, proved wiser than his brother. The stranger was meeting their master's glaze unflinchingly. It was then the stranger offered his challenge. The nature of the contest was for the king to decide. If he won, the stranger asked for nothing, but to be allowed to drink at the right hand of Russ during the feast. The shouts of the household rang against the shields strung around the roof. The laughter at this preposterous suggestion shared by all present. Russ demanded that should the wanderer fail, he would serve at the king's behest for a year. Grimly, the stranger accepted. The Wolf King did not wish to spoil a good feast. His first challenge was to an eating competition. The food was brought forth on vast brass shields, and the stranger ate well indeed, consuming many times more than the stoutest warriors present without pause. But by the time he looked up from his platter, Russ was finishing his third auroch. The vast red bones lay around him, not a morsel of meat to be seen. Giving voice to a thunderous belch, Russ grinned at the wanderer. Fangs glittered red in the torchlight. The stranger bowed his head. But the king was enjoying his sport. He realised that the brown-cloaked traveller had the spirit of a Fenrisian, and so challenged the newcomer to a drinking bout. The second contest began, sounded by a clarion horn, and by the time the wanderer had reached his sixth barrel of strong Fenrisian mead, there was no more time to drink. The Wolf King had drained this entire feast dry, consuming enough to fill a whole great company. The light of anger appeared in the wanderer's eyes. If he was not to be given the chance, how could he test his mettle? If all that would greet him was derision and scornful laughter, how could he welcome this warrior, so fond of his mead as his lost child? Driven by disappointment, the wanderer called Leman Russ a drunkard and a glutton, able to achieve nothing more than filling his face and bellowing hollow boasts. At this the court fell silent, not even many to breathe, as the Wolf King drew himself up to his full height, the blooded carcass of his meal crunching beneath his feet. Russ drew his great sword and stepped onto the banqueting table, a growl rising in his throat. The Wolf King calmly laid down the consequences of his last challenge, and his court backed away as won. Time seemed to stop as the Emperor of Mankind threw away his cloak, and hood falling from his face, his true form revealed, standing far taller than any man present, swathed in light and clad in baroque gold armour. The God Emperor stepped onto the banqueting table, his sword shimmering as it was drawn from its gem-encrusted scabbard. With a roar that shook the walls of the court, the Wolf King leapt. Battle was joined between the two titanic figures. The Emperor fought gracefully and with precision, his every act like liquid fire, his swordsmanship faster than eyes could follow. The Wolf King attacked with the force of pure fury, tempered by years of living by his skill and wits alone. The lustrous gold of the Emperor's varnished armour reflected the glimmer of torchlight and the eyes of 1,000 onlookers. The Wolf King's skin glistened with sweat and blood, his matted hair flying around him as he roared and howled. The speed and passion of Russ's attack, a perfect fusion of martial prowess and a focus that was nothing less than total, convinced the Emperor without doubt that this was one of his lost sons. Swinging his power fist around in a blurred golden arc, the Emperor struck Russ full in his face. It is testimony to the fortitude of Russ that within the hour he was able to think clearly once again. Recovering quickly from a blow that would have destroyed any mortal man, Russ made little show of his headache. It was as a result of ingesting mighty quantities of Fenrisian mead, rather than the result of the duel. But nevertheless, with bloody smiles and broken fang, he swore fealty to the Emperor of Mankind. It is well known amongst imperial scholars that, when given proof as to his origins, Leman Russ did indeed pledge his sword to the Emperor. His teaching and training went swiftly. It was a matter of weeks before the Emperor judged Russ worthy of leading his armies in the Holy War across the galaxy. Leman Russ's warriors were introduced to the Dosunterra who bore his mark within their very genes, and so it became to be that Leman Russ became the father, progenitor, and lord of the Space Wolves of the Adeptus Astartes. Now this contest between them both reminds me of a Norse saga I read quite a long time ago. It's Thor pitched against, I think, a frost giant, and they go through similar contests, drinking, etc. For example, when Thor can't finish his mead off, it turns out later he's been tricked, and in fact, the other end of this horn is trying to empty the ocean, which is why Thor can't finish it. Just a little insight there from some history things I've read. Anyway friends, on that note, who we now know would win between a fight between Russ and the Emperor, and who can drink the most and belch the best, we'll wrap up today's video. Comment down below.